Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sotah, daf memchet. I'm very excited to be almost finishing the Masechet with these very long but yet interesting dapim. We are going to have a siyum. We want to join the siyum in Hebrew tonight on Zoom, and there's a siyum on Wednesday. Wednesday, I should say at night, but it's not necessarily at night, depending on where you are. And we're looking forward to seeing you all there. If you haven't yet registered to get your Zoom link, please register. Everyone has their own unique Zoom links, so you'll have to register in order to be able to join. Okay, today's daf is dedicated by Goody Wild in honor of my amazing father, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, on his 90th birthday. May Hashem give him the strength to continue learning, guiding, thinking, and doing ad 120 shana v'hala. Mazal tov. Okay, we're going to get started. Let's get going with our long daf. We're going to go at a bit of a fast speed, but hopefully we'll get through everything in time. Yochanan kohen gadol he'evir hodayat mahama'asir. With the bottom of Mem Zayin we bet. Yochanan the kohen gadol. He said no more vidui ma'asir, no more confession of I took care of all my ma'asir. Why is that? So we saw yesterday the Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Hanina said because people are no longer giving it the way they were supposed to. They were supposed to give it to the levites. Instead, they give it to the kohanim. Why were they doing this? Actually, fascinatingly, because Ezra told them to. Ezra penalized, you might remember we learned this, he penalized the Levites because they didn't come back to Israel. And therefore he said, give it to the kohanim and not to the Leviim. As a result, everyone is now not doing things correctly, which is kind of ironic, right? They're doing things correctly the way that they were told by Ezra, but they're not doing things correctly because they're doing them the way that, not the way it says in the Vidui Maaser, which is, I gave it to the Levi. They can't say I gave it to the Levi when they didn't give it to the Levi, but they gave it to the Kohen. To which the Gemara asks a few questions. Question number one is, V'lo de ashar mascha, but there's other Maaser besides just the one you give to the Levi. Why don't they just talk about all the other ones and just leave out the part of, I gave it to the Levi? So Amar Rish Lakish, Kol bayit she'en mitvadeh Maaser Rishon, shuv ein mitvadeh al shar mascha. Rish Lakish says no. You have to do all of them. You can't, well, not necessarily all, but if you didn't do Maaser to the Levi, or you didn't give it to the Levi, you can't say the rest of it. My time, or why is that? Well, when the pasuk talks about the Maaser, it says you'll give it to the Levi and the Ger and etc. And the point is, Levi comes first in the pasuk, and therefore it must be the most important. So if you don't give, because there's also Maaser Ani that you give to the poor, but since the Levi comes first, if you don't give it to him, that basically doesn't allow you to say the rest. So question number one was, why couldn't we just remove that word, those words from text and be okay? No, you can't do that because that's the most important. Second question. Now, mifrashe. It does sound like they were taking the maaser. They just weren't giving it to the Levi. They were giving it to the kohen. But Vahatanya, it says in a Braita about this same Yochanan kohen gadol, which, by the way, it's a whole bunch of things we're not going to really have time to go off on today, but I'll at least raise the questions. Who exactly is Yochanan kohen gadol and when did he live is a big question. Some people think it's Matityahu's son from the Hanukkah story, much earlier. Some people think it's later and it's the end of Bayit Sheni. It's unclear exactly when he lived. But anyway, that's a whole discussion. But in any case, other things we saw about him, it says in a Braita, Afu bitela tavidui. Okay, that's our case. He got rid of this confession of the Maaser. Vigazal al hadamai. And he said, though, that we're worried that, now we're going to see this in a minute, that a lot of what we call ha'aretz, and we've learned this many times, people who aren't careful about halachot, one of the halachot we're particularly concerned that they're not careful about is specifically maaser. Lefi, why is that? Lefi sheshalach b'chol gvul Yisrael. He went looking, he went checking on the nation. He saw that many people only take the truma gadol and give it to the kohen. And maaser rishon and maaser sheni. But when it comes to the first tithe and the second tithe, the first one goes to the Levi, the second one gets eaten in Jerusalem, mixed by the owner. There's a lot of people that weren't doing this. Some people did, some people didn't. Amar lehem banai, both Amar lechem. He said, my sons, let me tell you something. If you don't give your truma to the kohen and you eat it, you get the death penalty by God, not by a man, but death by God. He said to them, by the way, if you don't take your maaser, there's truma in the maaser that has to go to the kohen. You would give the Levi a tenth. Of that, a tenth would go to the kohen. So by not doing the maaser, you're basically also subjecting yourself to the death penalty. So basically saying, this is quite serious. Get serious about this, take care of it. What did he do as a result? And so he went up and said the following tannaim. Anyone who buys produce from an haaretz, a person who's not so careful, or at least we're concerned they're not so careful, has to take the first tithe and the second tithe from the produce. We can assume he took the truma gadol and gave it to the kohen, but after that you have to take the tithes. So what do you do with the maaser rishon? You take a tenth from there and you give it to the notna kohen. You give it to the kohen. Why do you give it to the kohen? Because it belongs to the kohen, number one. And number two, there's nothing you could do with truma. A non-kohen can't eat truma. However, maaser sheni, what do you do with the second tithe? So that's obvious. Olev ochla b'Yerushalayim. That's what you do. You get to keep it for yourself, but you have to eat it in Jerusalem, or again, you redeem it onto coins, take the coins, take the money to Jerusalem and go buy food. You can buy food there, any kind of food and things like that. Maaser rishon, maaser ani, but when it comes to the first tithe, not the truma part of it, but the part that's supposed to go to Levi, or the maaser ani that's supposed to go to the poor people, that you actually get to keep. In other words, I bought produce from a Joe Schmo guy who, is an Ama Aretz. I have to take that because I'm not sure if he gave the masrot. I have to take it. A little bit I have to give to the kohen. After I separate my maaser, I do a tenth of that, I give to the kohen. The rest of it I separate, but I get to keep for myself. Okay, the part I have to bring to Jerusalem, I bring to Jerusalem. The rest of it I get to keep. Why? Because in the end, the poor person can't prove that no one took maaser on this. We don't really know what the Ama Aretz did. And the Levi can't prove that it belongs to him because maybe the Ama Aretz took maaser. So I actually get to keep that. And why is it different than the truma? Because these I can actually eat. It's not forbidden for me to eat the part that goes to the Levi. It's not forbidden for me to eat the part that goes to the poor person. So therefore I can actually eat them. So I have to separate them and deal with the truma from the maaser, of the maaser that goes to the Levi. I have to eat the maaser sheni in Jerusalem, but the rest of it I can actually eat myself. So anyway, why did we bring this? This whole thing shows, in other words, what did we say in the beginning? They were all taking maaser. It's just they were giving it to the kohen and not the Levi. And that's why they can't say we do maaser. But here it seems, I don't know, 50% of the population, I don't know what percentage were Ama Aretz and chaverim, but a huge percent of the population wasn't taking truma maaser. So how do you explain? It seems like maybe it was vidur maaser for that. Or at least the fact that we don't do vidur maaser because they were giving to the kohanim seems to imply everyone was giving. To which they answered, Tarte Tikin. He actually did two different things. And they were for different communities. Bitel vidoy de chaverim. When it came to the chaverim, they can't do vidoy because they're giving it to the kohanim and not the leviim, and then they can't say the ceremony, in an honest way, because they didn't give it to the Levi. Vigazal al d'mai shalamei haaretz. And in addition, when it came to the amei haaretz, he said anyone who buys from them has to take the truma maaser. And the last thing we have to figure out, so the Gemara will only get to later and just say, like we said before, so I'm going to explain it now, which is the last line of the Mishnah was, Biyamav, another thing, Ein sarich lish'ol al hadamai. You don't need to ask about damai. So now, I tried to explain this yesterday, but now we're going to explain it much better. What does this mean? This means that if I buy produce from you, now the produce I buy from you, let's assume you're a chaver, you know the halacha. Now, when I buy produce from you, I could be buying your produce, which I can assume you took truma maaser, but I could be buying produce that you purchased from an Ama Aretz. So now, normally, I would have to ask you, did you buy it from an Ama Aretz? And if so, did you take truma maaser? Right? I'd have to ask you, what's the status of this produce? Once Yochanan kohen gadol instituted this takana that everybody has to take, if you buy from an Ama Aretz, you must take truma maaser, I don't have to ask you anymore about demai, because right, demai is they say it's an abbreviation for dama. Like we don't know, right? We don't know what this is. It's something. But I don't need to ask you because there's no doubt anymore. Because I know that if you bought it from an Ama Aretz or got it from an Ama Aretz, you definitely took maaser because Yochanan kohen gadol said you have to. So now I don't need to ask you anymore. And that's the explanation of that last line in the Mishnah. Going back now to the other cases, because we haven't yet gotten to that last line in the Mishnah, we still have a few more lines about Yochanan kohen gadol and things he instituted. Afu bitel et ha'ma'orerim. He got rid of the ma'orerim. Ma'orerim usually sounds like people who wake people up in the morning in the temple or something, but that's not what it is. My ma'orerim, there would be no reason to cancel the people who wake up the kohanim in the morning to go to the work. In the temple, the Levites would stand on the steps. V'omrim Ura lama tishan Adonai. We would say, wake up, why are you sleeping, God? Amar lehem. So he said to them, why are you quoting this pasuk? It's a pasuk in Tehillim. Okay, now why are you quoting this pasuk? What are you saying? God is sleeping you're saying, God, hey, wake up. What are you doing? Why are you sleeping? It's not a very nice thing to say every day. And it says in a different pasuk, the garter of Israel never sleeps. So, right, never even drowses. So now they say, well, what does this pasuk mean? This pasuk means that when we're in trouble, it feels like God is sleeping. So the pasuk itself makes sense. The problem is saying this every day in the temple. Okay, it's not right. There might be pasukim that are true and could be true in certain situations and could mean a certain thing. But if we say it every day in the temple, one possibility is it's just by saying it every day, it gets people to think, oh my God, right. Whoa, God is sleeping and what's going on here, and think negatively of God. Or it could be also, some people say it was the tone the Levites said it in, and there's a way to say it. Lament Tishan Hashem, you could say in a positive way, like, okay, God, we're looking for you to help us. But you could also say it in, why are you sleeping, in that kind of tone, and it would be looked as degrading to God. So again, like many things in today's daf, we're going to see, and many things in many dapim, there's different ways to understand what the issue is. Ve'et nokfim. These are the strikers. So what does that mean? They hit. What do they hit? Again, we're talking about things in the temple that Yochanan canceled. So Amar of Yehuda Marav, Shayu misartin la'egel ben karnav kadesh yipol dam be'enav. We're going to have two explanations. Both have to do with that when they slaughter the animals in the temple, they didn't want a big fight from this part of the animals. So they would do something, two different opinions what they would do. According to the first opinion, there were these people, the nokfim. They would make a little slit in the head of the animal between the horns in order that blood would fall into the eyes of the animal, and the animal wouldn't see the person coming at him to go slaughter him and wouldn't therefore resist. But then he canceled this. It looked like you were making a mum in the animal, and then you're going to bring this animal for a sacrifice that looks like it has a blemish. That doesn't make sense. That's one explanation. The other is, from Anitatan in a bright it says, with some way that they would do it, also the people would use when they worshiped idols, they would smack the animal they would beat it with these sticks. Amar lahem ad so this is like bringing a nevela to the altar because you're killing it before you're slaughtering it. To which they say, nevela? What do you mean? We're not killing it by hitting it. We're slaughtering the animal. That's not the issue. Ela trefot. You're making it a trefa. What's a trefa? A nevela is an animal that's killed not by slaughter. That's not what's happening here. They would hit it to kind of, again, same idea. We want to weaken the animal so that he doesn't put up a fight. But then what? And then they would slaughter it. So they would slaughter it. So it was kosher shlita. But they say, the issue is not nevela, it's trefa. What's trefa? Trefa, right? We use the word treif to talk about mean not kosher, but trefa really means an animal that's sick and is going to die within the next 12 months. That's at least a general definition of it. There's a little bit of a machloka. We'll get to it in Chulin. But it's an animal that's sick and is going to die. And that kind of animal, even if you do a kosher slaughter, it's not permitted to eat. It's not kosher. So they say if you beat the animal before slaughtering it, you might make a hole in the membrane of the brain, and that will make the animal a trefa. And therefore, amad v'itkilen tabaot bekarpi. You might remember there's these rings in the ground in the temple, in the area where they would slaughter. And those rings were to put the animal under a ring so the animal wouldn't be able to resist. And they did that instead of all these other methods that people were using. And that Yochanan kohen gadol took care of, which is interesting, by the way, in terms of when you put him historically. Right? We always think those rings were there for a long time. So depending if he's the one who instituted them, it's a good question when he lived and when they were there, when they became part of the temple. We have two more things in this Mishnah. They would bang on their hammers in Jerusalem on the holiday, on chol hamoed. Now, chol hamoed, you're allowed to do work if it's mishum davar ha'aved, if you're going to have a financial loss. Okay, you're going to lose customers in the future. Okay, let's say if you don't sell on that day. So you're allowed to work. So these people were working because they were allowed to. But what was the problem? It was making a lot of noise. So again, two possibilities. Either because it was making noise, people would hear and think that they were working on chol hamoed and not knowing that it was because of the financial loss, and think that you could actually do regular work on chol hamoed. That's one possibility. Another is that it just made a lot of noise, and that's not appropriate for a holiday to have all this banging. And anyone who lives in a city like mine where there's always construction going on and banging and all that, right? You know how much that noise is bothersome, and on a holiday, you don't really want that. And that kid amaran, as we said before, we already explained. Moving on to the next mission. Now we're going to get to a whole bunch of things about, this is when people sit around and they say, oh, the good old days, and everything was great then. And look what happened as a result of the destruction we're going to see all these things are no longer with us, right? These days are not like the previous days. And it's this kind of lamenting the loss of the temple and the loss of other things. So it starts off with Misha Batlas Sanhedrin, from the time there was no Sanhedrin. Now, some people say this is the destruction, because it doesn't mean, even though the Sanhedrin went to a bunch of different places, remember it moved to Yavne, and then it had all different places it went, still it was the Sanhedrin left the temple, and maybe that's what it means. It didn't have the power it had before. Or some people say, no, it's really talking about a later time, once really there was no Sanhedrin anymore. Batel Hashir mi Beit HaMishtaot. People are no longer allowed to sing in parties. Okay, interesting halacha. We're going to have to talk about this. Shenema bashir lo yishtu yain. Says in the pasuk, when they sing, they shouldn't drink wine, and in the parties they drank wine. It's not appropriate to sing while you're drinking wine. Two possibilities as to why this is. One way of understanding this is that it's all part of zecher lechorban. Right now that we don't have these things anymore, we have to be in mourning. We have to do things differently than we did them before to remember. Right? We do all sorts of things. Zecher lechorban. We break a glass at a wedding, right? So this is one of them. You can't have singing at parties. Interesting. We do this, right? We're going to have to talk about this. Some people say that the issue is that we don't want frivolity, and maybe what's the connection to the Sanhedrin? Well, maybe when the Sanhedrin was there, they were able to control more. There was a centralized court. They could control what songs people sang, how they did it. It was done appropriately. The words of songs. We all know there's songs with words that are totally inappropriate. There's words that are very appropriate, right? Songs, there's different kinds of songs. So when the Sanhedrin was there, they could control the content and how it was done and all that. Once there's no, right, that's giving a lot of power to the court that they really could control all that, but that's a separate thing. But once it's a Sanhedrin, we can't control that, and therefore they just forbade it in general, right? Drinking and singing could lead to, mixed dancing, as I say, right? So anyway, it could lead to issues. So it's unclear whether it's korban or the way we would call it the general category of pritzut, okay, of inappropriate licentious behavior. We're going to see more about this in the Gemara. Okay, when the Nevi'im Arishonim died, which we don't yet know what the Nevi'im Rishonim is, the early Nevi'im, they canceled the urim v'tumim. That was a way they used to communicate with God. There was no more urim v'tumim anymore after the first prophets. Mishacharav Beit HaMikdash batel shamir. Once there was no temple, we no longer had the shamir. This was a type of worm that we're going to learn what this worm was used for when we get to the Gemara. V'nofet sufim, and the sweetness of the honeycomb. Upasku anshe manami Yisrael, and we no longer had people who had strong belief in God. Shenema Hoshi Hashem ki gamar chasid. God save us because we no longer have a chassid anymore. We don't have the chassidim. We really have this pure belief in God. Again, we'll talk about all these things more in the Gemara. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Yoshua, he said that Rabbi Yoshua testified, there's no day without a curse, meaning all our days are cursed at this point. But right, this is really describing a terrible situation, that once the temple was destroyed, we lost everything. Every day is cursed. Lo yarada tal bracha. The dew now falls. It doesn't give blessing like it's supposed to. It gives curse to the land. V'nital tama pirot. We don't have the taste of fruits anymore. Rabbi Yossi Omer af nital shumana pirot. The fatness or the sweetness of the fruits is gone. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer hatahara natla atatan v'tareach. The fact that we don't keep laws of purity anymore, that took away the taste and the smell of the fruits. Hamaasrot natluat shumana dagan, because right, this is the midah keneged midah, because we didn't take our tithes, so that caused the fatness of the wheat and all that, all those crops to disappear. Chachamim omrim haznut akshafim kiluat hakol. The rabbis say the licentious behavior and the witchcraft that was going on, that destroyed everything. Okay, so we have this description, which is obviously somewhat exaggerated, about how bad things are and how things are no longer the way they used to be. And we lost all these special things on account of our sins, basically. So the Gemara starts off and says, what's the connection to the Sanhedrin and the singing? Where do we get that just because the Sanhedrin is no longer there, we can't sing? Amar Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua Damar Kra. He says the pasuk says the kenim mishar shabatu bachurim miniginatam. This kenim were no longer wouldn't go anymore into their gates, and therefore the bachurim are no longer going to sing. So there you see this connection between the people in the shar, which are generally the judges, sit in the gates, and the fact that the young people can't sing anymore. Amarav udna deshama zimra te'aker. Now until now we just talked about singing. Comes Rav and he says anyone who listens to singing, listens to music, will be uprooted. And many of the commentaries say what he really means is don't waste your time listening to music. You should be learning Torah. And any kind of listening to music is bitul Torah, which is a whole third element, right, that we didn't discuss until now, which is it's a waste of time. Okay, that's another option. Amarav zimra bebeita chorba b'sefa. You listen to singing in the house, Rava says it will bring destruction at the threshold of your house. Okay, meaning it'll start in the threshold and then come into your house. Okay, this is a pasuk in Sefania, which is, right, it's saying there will be a voice singing in the house, right, in the window. It will cause destruction in the saf, on the threshold, on the entranceway into the house. Ki arza era, because the cedar is era. We're going to have to see what this word era means. My ki arza era, what does it have to do with the cedar being era? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, ba'itam subach barazim, a house that's built with cedar. Irhu is a city. What era they assumed is from the language of Ir. It's a city. What does that mean? That means nothing. Ela, he says, it must be afilu ba'itam subach barazim mitro'eh. Even if you have a house built with cedar, which is a really strong wood, it's going to be shaken up and will start to wear away. Meaning if you sing in your house, it wears away the roots of your house, okay? Will wear away things starting from the entrance and then it will go into your house. Now you can infer from here, when the destruction starts, it starts in the threshold of your house and then goes inside. Some people say that same thing is learned from somewhere else. An abandoned house will be attacked by this in the gate. Okay, some people say attacked by shadim, by evil spirits. Some people say it'll be attacked by wormwood, which basically eats away first at the outside of your house and then comes into your house. I saw it happen once and it attacked like an ox. Okay, whether it's an evil spirit attack like an ox or this wormwood, and it just basically destroyed everything. Rav Huna, Zimra denagde udebakare shara. The song of people who work on boats and the song of people who work getting the animals to work in the fields, or maybe the shepherd, is permitted. But digarde asir, but the weavers is not. What are we talking about? What's the difference between the song of those people and the song of those? Why are they singing? Well, we sing when we work, right? It's good for people. They like to listen to music. It gets them moving. It helps motivate. So if you're some people say that those people they were doing hard work and they needed the songs to kind of keep them going. Whereas the weavers don't really need music. They're not working very hard. You have to understand in those days, the weavers, the gardening, where we've seen this in a whole bunch of sugyas, they're viewed as the lowlifes. So either it's that it's not a hard job and therefore they don't need the music and therefore it's a waste and they're just using it for, they use these words skulk and, frivolity, or it's the content of the songs. And that these people are the lowlifes. The music they listen to is trash. But the people who are in the respectable jobs, they're listening to better music and therefore it's okay. So again, there's this difference. Does it have to do with frivolity and what causes frivolity? And anyway, there's a little bit of debate, but you do see all of a sudden that there are cases where singing is okay. Rav Huna batel zimra. He got rid of all singing in his time. The prices, there was so much bounty that the prices dropped. You could buy 100 ducks for a zuz. You could buy 100 se'av wheat for a zuz. And there was so much to go around. People weren't even buying them. There was so much supply because they were rewarded because they didn't have music anymore. Rav Chisda said, come on, we can listen to music. By the way, you see even rabbis disagree with this. But and then the price went up. He was looking for a duck for one duck for a zuz, and he couldn't even find one. Okay, the price had gone up and the supply had diminished. Amar Yosef, Zamre Gavre Va'ane Nashe Pritsuta. Here you start to see the pritsut. If men sing and women answer, that leads to frivolity. Zamre Nashe Va'ane Gavre. If women start singing and the men answer, Ke'esh Bana Oret. That is worse than pritsut. That's like putting straw on a fire. We know it burns very fast. Lamai nafkamina, what's the difference? Why are they telling us which is more harsh than the other? Libitule hamakameha. This is the most fascinating line in this whole sugya. What does it mean, libitule hamipneha? If the rabbis see, heads of the community see, that people are doing both this and that, and they have to stop from doing one, they realize they're not going to be able to stop everybody from doing what they're doing. So they pick what's the more serious. So that's why you need to know which is worse. Stop the women who are singing and the men are answering, because that's much worse. Leave the men singing and the women answering. Okay, now you see here, you can get a historical perspective here, that even though they wanted to stop this, both Rav Chisda, you see, was against it, even though it led to bad things. And you see here that the rabbis couldn't really control the people that were singing, and they couldn't really stop it. So they had to, draw their lines and say, look, I'm going to, right? This is like every parent, right? Your kid's doing a lot of things wrong, but you got to pick what your issues are. What's more important to you than other things? So that's what they're telling you here. Yochanan, more about how bad it is to sing and drink. Right? We always say don't drink and drive. They're saying don't drink and sing. If you're drinking, actually here it's in playing musical instruments. If you use 4 types of musical instruments while you're drinking, you will bring 5 terrible calamities will befall the people. How do we know this? From a pasuk, Shenemal. It says in Yeshayahu, for those who wake up early and run after drinking, after a beer, and they have wine afterwards. Okay, 4 musical instruments. And they drink wine together. They won't see the work of God. And then what does it say? What does it say after that? They're going to go to galut, from out not knowing anything. They're going to bring rav lo, they're going to bring famine. So there's exile, famine. They're going to make Torah be forgotten. That's number 3. They're going to bring people down. But what does people mean? Which really means the one who hates God, but it really means to God. They're going to cause God to come down. How do we know this? It says, Vayishpal ish, they'll bring man down. Well, Ein ish ala kadosh baruch hu. Ish means God. We've seen this before. Hashem ish milchama from Shirat Hayam, where right after the splitting of the Red Sea, it says God is a man of war. Ve'enei gvohim tishapalna. And the eyes of the mighty will be lowered. Shegormim shiflut shel Yisrael. They'll also cause the downfall of the Jewish people. So they'll call exile, famine, no Torah. God will be lowered, and people that were on high will now be lowered. And what does it say after that? As if this wasn't bad enough. Moving now to Amud Bet. Basically, you're going down to the depths. Okay, this is basically you're going into hell. So this is all the bad stuff that music will bring. Okay, well, what do we do with this? I mean, we sing, we listen to music. How is this okay? So there's different opinions about how to relate to this. The Shulchan Aruch talks about this and basically says there's just a quoting of a whole bunch of different opinions. The Rama quotes Tosfot, who basically says maybe we're talking about the music with the wine, maybe we're only talking parties, maybe we're only talking about kings that do this morning and night, and maybe not regular people, and maybe regular people only when they're at a party. But if you listen to musical instruments otherwise, maybe it's not a problem at all. And then that at least minimizes it somewhat. They talk about lidvar mitzvah. If you're doing it for a mitzvah and it's sanctified songs, that's okay. Some people say it's specifically using sanctified like psukim for frivolity, but maybe regular music would be okay. There's all sorts of different opinions about this, but it's a very interesting topic, and we don't have time to go into it more than today, but very interesting to see kind of what happened and how it is that we do listen to music. Okay. And the question is it okay that we listen to music, and what kind of music? And maybe, they would disapprove of some of the music that we listen to, and that would be clear, but maybe not. Again, it depends how you understand this isur, this prohibition. And again, it depends. Is it because it's leading to frivolity? Is it because it's zecher l'chorban, right? What exactly is causing the isur? What's the problem with it? And what type of music? Again, what words are you using? All of that. Okay. Mishametu niviim harishonim. Yeah, I was hoping there would be some extra content on this. There isn't, so sorry. Yafid, actually, I see you're asking, and is going to be on this next topic, which is the wisdom versus the prophets. And when we're going to talk about when prophecy ended, and then in the end we have chachamim, and then we have heavenly voices, and what's more important, chokhmah or Navi. Mishametu Nevi'im Arishonim. Man Nevi'im Arishonim. So who are the Nevi'im Arishonim? Well, right, there was no urim v'tumim anymore. From what time? Amar Avhuna Zed David Ushlomo Ushmuel Ushlomo. This is from the time of David Amelech, Shlomo Amelech, and Shmuel, who was the prophet at the time of David. Rav Nachman Amar Bimei David Zimnin Salik v'Zimnin Lo Salik. Sometimes the urim v'tumim worked, sometimes it didn't, which shows that it was kind of on its way out because it didn't always work. How do we know? Shaharei Sha'al Tzadok Ba'al Talo. Tzadok asked the urim v'tumim and got an answer. Sha'al Evyatar was the kohen gadol also at some point there, v'lo al talo, and it didn't work for him. How do we know this? Shneimar vaya'al Evyatar. Now, I'm not going to get into how we darshan this whole thing, but it's a pasuk about how Tzadok was the kohen gadol, and then it says vayal Evyatar ima'am, and they say it must be vayal means he got passed over, and they got rid of him. And why they get rid of him? They claim because he asked the urim v'tumim and it didn't answer him, so they said, okay, you're no longer the kohen gadol. Mativ Rava bar Shmuel. So now they ask a question. If you're going to say the Nevi'im Rishonim and there's no urim v'tumim already from the time of David and Shlomo and Shmuel, we have a problem. Mativ Rava bar Shmuel. There's a pasuk in Divrei Yamim which says, and now we're talking about, okay, skip ahead a bunch of years, we have Uziyahu. He's the king of Yehuda. He's the grandson of Yoash, who is hidden by the kohen gadol Yehoyada when Atalia wants to be queen and she tries to kill everybody. He gets saved by the kohen gadol Yehoyada. Yehoyada has a son called Zechariah, and Zechariah appears with Yoash's grandson Uziyahu, and it says here, "Vayihi lidrosh Elohim kol yemei Zechariah hamivin berot Elohim." So he beseeched God. Basically, it would be doresh Elohim. How do you doresh Elohim? My la bu'im v'tumim. Is it not with the urim v'tumim? So you see that even after the time of David and Shlomo, many years later, the urim v'tumim was still in existence. To which they say, "Lo b'nevi'im." When it said he beseeched God, it meant he went to the prophets. Okay, so originally it used to be the urim v'tumim. It morphed into the prophets. Tashma, but we have another question. If you're really going to say, so again, assuming Nevi'im Rishonim is David, Shmuel, and Shlomo. Again, David and Shlomo were not prophets, but it just means in their time, the prophets that were in their time. Well, we have a problem with this. Bright Tashma, Mishachara Beit HaMikdash Rishon, Batlu Arei Migrash. Okay, another Braita about what happened when there was no longer Beit HaMikdash. We no longer had Arei Migrash. What are Arei Migrash? These are the Levite cities that were given when the people had their plots of land, each of the tribes, they each gave some cities to the Levites. But once there was no Beit HaMikdash, people weren't living in their tribal lands anymore, so the Levites didn't get these cities. And there was no longer urim v'tumim. Here comes our problem. Before we're going to read a whole long Braita, but we already have the problem. The problem is when the temple was destroyed, there was no longer urim v'tumim. And what temple? The first temple. Well, now what do you see? It ended at the end of the first temple time period, not the beginning of the first temple time period when Shlomo built the Beit HaMikdash. We're talking many, many years later. So we'll have to figure this out. Upasak melech mi Beit David. Another thing that happened, there were no longer kings from the Davidic dynasty. Ve'im lachasha adam lomar. And if you want to say, if somebody says to you, wait, there was urim v'tumim even after the first temple period, because look, pasuk about Nehemiah, vayomer hashirshata lahem. Tirshata is a reference to Nehemiah. Nehemiah said to the people, Asher lo yochlu mikodesh kodeshim, you're not going to eat from the sanctified meat, ad hamoed kohen urim v'tumim, until the kohen stands with the urim v'tumim. Now, that makes it sound like, right, don't eat the kodeshim now, but when the urim v'tumim comes back and the kohen stands with the urim v'tumim, then you'll be able to, which sounds like it existed in the second temple time period. Well, and more or less say, no, you misunderstood what Nehemiah said. He was speaking, ka'adam shomer lechavero, it's like when people say, right, people use this now, until the Mashiach comes, right? Until Tchiyat HaMeitim happens, the resurrection of the dead. He was basically saying, at some future point, there'll be urim v'tumim, and then you can eat it, but it's not going to happen now. And he wasn't referring to that in the second temple time period, there will be urim v'tumim. In any case, it's definitely, so it didn't exist in second temple time period, but it did exist the whole temple, first temple. And that goes against what we said in Nevi'im Rishonim. So therefore, El Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Man Nevi'im Rishonim, who's called the first prophets? Lafuke, first is always compared to last. Well, who are the last ones? Lafuke michagai Zechariah Malachi de'achronim ninu. Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, they're the last three in Trasar. They were the last prophets. The Tanu Amanan, as we see in a Braita, Mishametu, Chagai, Zechariah, Malachi, they all lived after the destruction of the first temple. Now we're going to basically say, now if it's perfectly with the Braita, because The Nevi'im Rishonim were those who prophesied before those three. Once those prophesied, right, that was the end, and then there was no longer urim v'tumim. And once they died, and this is the next stage. Okay, so first we had urim v'tumim and prophets. Then we had only prophets. Then we went to a time period where nistal karuach hakodesh misrael. There was no longer prophecy. But they still had some connection to God. What was it? Mishtamshim bebatko. They would use these heavenly voices, which is interesting because the famous story of the Tanur Shalachnai, we have that lo mashkichim bebatko. We don't listen to batkos, and we don't use heavenly voices, certainly not in determining halacha. Now here you're going to see they use them, not exactly though for determining halacha. Okay, let's see what they use them for. They were all gathered together in the second floor in the house of Guria and Jericho. A heavenly voice came down and said, there's one among you who really could be a prophet. The presence of God could be upon him, but what? But their generation is not ripe for it. So they looked around, they said, who is it? They looked around, they figured the only one this must be referring to is Hillel HaZaken. What's the relevance and what they do with this? Well, Kishemet, when he died, his bidu, Hey Chasid He'anav Talmido Shel Ezra. They said, you're a Hasid, you're a humble person, right? Probably they didn't realize his greatness because he was so humble and they needed the heavenly voice to kind of wake them up and realize, and you're Talmud of Ezra. Now, he wasn't a Talmud of Ezra, he lived way after, but he was going in the path of Ezra. My dad, Hillel made Aliyah, like Ezra made Aliyah, maybe that's also another similarity, but basically he was continuing his way. V'shuv Pamacheret, another story about a batko, similar, very similar story. Hayum Subim B'Aliyah b'Yavne. Sitting in a second floor in Yavne in a house. V'nitan lehem batko min hashamayim. They always kind of gathered in these second floors of houses. A heavenly voice came down from the heavens. Again, someone who could, the divine presence could be on him. But the generation is not ripe for this. They figured it must be Shmuel HaKatan. When he died, they eulogized him. When they connected him to Hillel. He himself said at the time of death, he kind of prophesied about things that were to happen. There's a big debate about who these people are, which Shimon, which Yishmael, and what he was referring to. But Shimon and Yishmael, Lechorba, they're going to be destroyed. Some people say this is part of the Asara Rugei Malchut. Some of them are. His friend, their friends will be also killed. Right? This is either the Bar Kokhba rebellion or the 10 martyrs. Ushar Amalaviza, the rest of the nation will be embarrassed, humiliated, and all these terrible tragedies are going to befall the people. So we had a sort of prophecy at the end of his life. There was one more, if you might remember him. He comes up in the 10 martyrs that we talk about on Yom Kippur. And Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, they wanted to, in Eila Eskara, they wanted also to say the following about him, to eulogize him in this way. But what happened? They didn't have time because he was one of the people killed by the Romans, and they didn't have time. Right, when the enemy kind of kills your person, you can't have a proper eulogy. They don't allow you that kind of thing. Moving on. Now we have this shamir, this worm. Okay, once there was no Beit HaMikdash, there was no longer shamir. Tanu Rabbanit, shamir. Shabo banash Shlomo at Beit HaMikdash. He used this for building the temple. Shneimal. V'habayit b'ibanoto even shleima masan nivneh. It was built with these full stones, and then it says they didn't. The continuation of the pasuk is they didn't use any metal implements. Hadran kirtavan to Rabbi Yehuda says they really didn't use metal implements. So how did they shape the stones? They used this worm, and the worm would kind of eat away at the stone. Had this special talent of being able to hew the stones. Amar Rabbi Nechemia, how could you possibly say that? There's contradictory pasuk. Halok farnema kol elavani mikarot v'chule migororot b'migera. This is Shlomo. It's talking about all the houses he built, which includes his own houses and the temple. And it says migororot b'migera, which is a metal implement. So they use metal implements on it. So how do you explain the previous pasuk? Rabbi Nechemia says, "Shamat kimi b'chutz u machnis mi b'fnim." He would do it outside and bring it inside. Okay, he would make sure that all the metal implements that we used on the stones were done on the outside, and then they would bring it in already ready. This a little sounds like, do you remember we had the whole sugi in the beginning about the dirt? Do we have to bring the dirt from the outside and bring it inside, or do we use what's already inside? So anyway, there's a lot of mi b'chutz and mi b'fnim at the end of this Masechet. Maybe I'll pull something together for the siyum. If not, at least just note the connection. Still haven't figured it all out yet. Amar Rebbe, Nir'im divrei Rabbi Yehuda ba'avnei mikdash, v'divrei Rabbi Nechemia ba'avnei beito. So Rebbe says, what Rabbi Yehuda said is really, his pasuk refers to the mikdash. The pasuk Rabbi Nechemia brought, not what Rabbi Nechemia said. So Rabbi Nechemia kind of worked it all out. But no, he's saying the pasuk he was talking about was about the other houses of Shlomo. When it came to the regular houses, he could use the metal implements. It's specifically in the temple that you can't use any metal implements. Why? Because metal implements are used to kill people. So we don't want any of that in the temple. Next. So now we're going to learn more about the shamir. So Rabbi Nechemia, shamir l'mayata, what did you need the shamir for if you could use these metal implements? Well, there's a separate issue that he talks about. You need it for the following. Remember we talked about recently, the choshen and the ephod of the kohen had these stones on it. There were the 12 stones on his chest thing, and on the shoulder there were 2, right? 1 stone on each shoulder. And they would have the names of the tribes etched in them, engraved. Well, how do you engrave? There's a bit of a problem. So, you can't write the names in ink, which means they're etched in. But you can't use a metal implement to engrave them. They have to be complete. If you etch, right, you engrave it, you're going to take part of it out. So they would write in ink. They would put the shamir, kind of put it where the ink is, and it would make like a little crack in it. And it's like the figs. When they ripen, they crack a little, but you're not missing anything. There's just a little crack. Or more like the ground cracks in the time of the rain, but it doesn't lose anything. So that's what it was. It kind of cracked when the worm would go on it. It would make this little crack. It wouldn't actually lose any part of the stone, not like engraving. And that's how they would do it. So for him, that's what it was. For the other opinion, it was to actually to make the stones into the proper shapes that they needed them. Tanu Rabbanan, shamir ze briato keseora, it's like the size of a barley corn. It was built in the time of existed in the time of creation. This is from the famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avot about all these things that existed already from the days of creation. Nothing hard can ruin it, like it's very strong. In other words, it can basically engrave or make, right? It can do all sorts of things with hard items. How would they protect it? Because it was very teeny. So thank you. That's a better translation. Nothing can withstand it. How would they protect it? They would use these sponges of wool. They would use these lead vessels to put it in. And they would put bran fibers from the barley to protect it, to a soft kind of place. Now we're going to have all sorts of things again. They lament, oh, we no longer have this. So which is a special kind of silk, and white glass. Another writer that says very similarly. Those same 2 things. Barzel and chariots of iron. Some people say even this congealed wine, the bami sneer that came from Sneer, which is up north. That's like these, it's like the figs, the dried figs that have this sweetness to it. Benofet sufim. So that was in the Mishnah that there's no longer nofet sufim, the sweetness of the honeycomb. So my nofet sufim, amarav, solet shetzaf al gabe nafat. It's a very fine flour that stays at the top. It floats. That's where they get sufim. It floats at the top of the sieve. And it's so sweet. It tastes like a dough that's mixed with honey and oil. The Levi Amar Shtei Kikarot Hanizbakot B'Tanor V'Tochot U'Ba'ot Ad Shemagiyot Zeh. Right, if you bake bread, this is like your biggest dream. You put 2 loaves of bread, one on either side of the oven, and they expand so much, and they're so delicious that they touch each other. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Omer Zeh Dvash Haba Min Hatzipia. It's dvash that comes from tzifia. What's tzifia? My mashma. This is on the pasuk in the Ma'apilim that tried to go into the land after the Meraglim came back and said you can't do it, and then they said. And then Moshe said, you're never going to go in. And then they went anyway. And then the Amoraim come down. And it says they came down like bees. So now they say, what does the Targum explain? How did Rav Sheshet explain this? In other words, they're up in the high places. That's what saf, like in high places. And then they bring down the honey from the heights of the mountains. That's how the Amorim kind of sweep down and attacked us. Now we're going to talk, because we're talking about the tzapichim. So here, the tzufim. Now we get to the tzapichim and also the zipim. What is dvas zipim and dvas tzapichim? So right now they're saying a halacha that we learned before, which is if you pour honey, you pour anything from one dish into another. Basically, if the bottom one is impure, the top one is not impure, even though they're connected through the stream, except for this very thick honey. Okay, so what is this? My zipim. Rabbi Yochanan dvash shemizayfim bo. You can lizayef is to forge it. You can mix it. It's so thick you can mix it with water and wine, and no one will know the difference. Okay, honey was more expensive than wine in those days. These were places in Israel. It comes from the Shevet Yehuda, in Yoshua. It says that's where the Judean tribes. So Zif was a place, and it has nothing to do with what. It's not describing that it's a forgery. We have the same thing in a different place. They told Shaul where David was hiding, and it says the zifim, my zifim, same two explanations. I'm Rabbi Yochanan, b'nei adam hamizayfim divreihem, they lie. Rabbi Elazar amar Shem Komam d'chtiv zif b'telim u'ba'alot. They came from the place called Zif. Upasku anshe amana. Last part for today. No longer people who have this belief in God. What kind of belief in God are we talking about? I'm Rabbi Yitzchak. These are people that believe in God, and we're not just talking about belief in God. This is like those kids we said that they complained they didn't get any, right? They lost their jobs and they didn't believe God was going to find them a new one. Here we're talking about people who don't believe in God, that He's going to get them food tomorrow, that they're going to have work. And as we see, Tanya gadol omel. This is they're stopped, right? This is after the destruction. People no longer have that kind of belief in God. If you have bread in your basket, you start worrying, what am I going to eat tomorrow? You're basically not believing in God because you're worried that God's not going to provide for you tomorrow. You have today, so what are you worrying about tomorrow? Obviously, there's some boundary here, right? You have to be worried a little bit, but not. It's kind of saying, I don't believe God's going to help me. They try to explain what this pasuk means. What's going to make them lose their table in the world to come? These righteous people, if they lose a little faith in God, in terms of this parnasa thing, they're not going to, right? That's what this pasuk means. Mi baz liyom k'tanot, yom when they're k'tanei emunah. But Rava says, different explanation. Elu k'tanei b'nei rishei Yisrael. These are the people who are the sons, the young children of the evil people. And rishaim sometimes get punished if their children die. And mivazbizim din avihem lati lavo. They mess up. What's the baz? They tear up the decree against their fathers in the future. What does that mean? Omrim lefanav. I'm going to just do a little bit in tomorrow's daf. Omrim lefanav ribono shel me'achar she'ata atili para mehem lama eketa shinehem bam. They actually do a good thing. When their fathers go to get punished in the heavens, they come forward and they say, but you already knocked their teeth out by killing us. That was punishment enough. They got their punishment in this world. You should now give them reward in the world to come because they've already gotten atonement for their punishments. So that's what they say, Kimi Baz Yom Ketanot, the Yom that the Ketanot will come and vouch for their parents. Okay, that was a lot today. To summarize the daf, you can read the summary on the site. There was some problem with the site this morning. I hope that it's resolved. I'll send out the link to the podcast so that everyone can listen even without having to go to the website. And I'll send the link also to the YouTube when it's up. And that way, or maybe by the time we finish this class, the website is up, although probably wishful thinking. Okay, have a great day, everyone. Looking forward to seeing you all at the Siyum. There's no regular class tomorrow morning, so it's just the Siyum. Okay, and we'll meet up on Thursday, starting Gitin. And by the way, the Gitin Dapim are much shorter, so just so you know. Have a great day, everyone.